and welcome back to the Dreamcast. I am your host, Denise Walsh. I combine science, scripture, and stories that will inspire you to dive deep, break through your own personal glass ceiling, and design a life of your dreams.
Welcome back to the Dreamcast. In today's episode, we are going to talk to, let's call him the grandfather of podcasting. He started podcasting in 2004 at the Web Talk World Radio Show, and it was recognized as the first nationally syndicated radio program in the world to begin podcasting. And since then, he has had 14 years of experience in the podcasting world, helping people share their passion with the world in a way that connects and communicates in audio form. He has worked with Voxnest.com, Spreaker.com. He has worked with PodcastOne in Beverly Hills. He has been a part of Microsoft, Xbox Live, and Zoom, and is currently the host of SpreakerLiveShow.com on Wednesdays and NewMediaShow.com on Saturdays. So, goodness sakes, he certainly has quite the resume. And I know from being sort of a pioneer in my industry, just the ups and downs, the learning curves, the breakthroughs, and the success that can happen when you're the first one in a market. And so he has fallen in love with the idea of podcasting and now travels the world to share his vast knowledge. And so I'm really excited for you to hear his story. Oh yeah. And he lives in Seattle. So big Dreamcast welcome to Rob Greenlee.
It's great to be here, Denise. Thanks for inviting me to join you on your terrific show.
Yay! Well, I'm really excited to hear a bit more of your story and expand on it because you are a true pioneer. I have been with our company for 11 years, and so I know what it's like to pioneer a new venture. And you've been in podcasting for over 14 years. So tell us a little bit about your story, your background, and how you got into podcasting before podcasting was a thing.
Well, I got involved in doing online media and online content back in the late 90s. And so when I started working in this, I was actually working part-time as a consultant in helping small companies optimize for search engines. So when I got into this, it was really all about getting online content, findable and discoverable. And that's what pulled me into creating an audio program. Was I walked into a radio station and wanted to reach more potential customers. So I started talking about the web and the internet in a local radio station up in the Seattle market and did that every week, every Saturday morning. And then eventually I took it out of the radio station, built my own little studio in my bedroom in my home, and started doing the show there. It's called the Web Talk World Radio Show is what I was doing back then, and got it syndicated on a bunch of radio stations around the country up on the satellite the XM Satellite Radio Network, and got 15 broadcast stations, some public radio stations. Did a lot of streaming back then too. As you recall, if you were around during the early days of the internet, people were a little starved for bandwidth. So taking your show or an audio program or video online back in those days was a little bit of a challenge, and the quality wasn't that great. So when I started in all this, it was not like it is today, where it's kind of ubiquitous and everywhere. People were a little bit more starved for bandwidth is probably a great way to call it. And so just started creating shows and creating content and playing around with different things, and started blending the written word with audio content and writing articles for newspapers and magazines, and just really kind of syndicating my show out to as many places as I could back in those days. So that's kind of how I got started. And then I started helping other podcasters to grow and develop their shows, and also work with a lot of radio shows too, to help them get online kind of streaming distribution. I had my own servers that were co-located back in the early days, and really was really helping others. And that's what really pulled me into this space, was working on platforms and working for hosting platforms and getting involved in the streaming side. So I went from there, and I went to work for a startup in Seattle called Melodio, and this was back in like 2005. They were basically a music service that was converting over to spoken word and podcasting. So I started working with them building content catalogs for pre-smartphone type of devices. I don't know if you remember like the Motorola Razr and the Nokia phones that were out there.
Yeah.
So we made apps all around the world for a lot of wireless carriers to carry spoken word content in a subscription service. And so I got started in building catalogs of content back in those days for a venture-funded startup is what it really was. And then eventually went to work for a small company called Microsoft and got involved in launching the podcast area for Zune, which was at the time a competitive platform to what was going on with the Apple iPod. And so Microsoft had the ambition that they wanted to take Apple on in that area. So I was at role to at a company like Microsoft. After 6 years, I went to work for a PodcastOne, Los Angeles, and worked with a lot of big name podcasters down there for about a year. And then left there and have been working at Spreaker for the last three and a half years or so, and kind of helping podcasters. It's the same thing I've been doing for years and years, is helping podcasters and audio creators build distribution for their shows. And I continue to do that today.
Wow. Things change so fast in this world of technology. And so back in the 90s or the early 2000s, you were working on SEO, you were a consultant helping people get their brand and message out there. But did you have experience in radio, or did you kind of stumble into radio and decide to marry the two?
I really had no experience at all. And actually, I had no experience really being a public speaker either. So it was an effort of necessity at the time, reach more people for my consulting business. So I just took the plunge and figured I'd figure it out. When I got in the radio station, I found that doing live radio is a unique challenge. It's not always easy to book multiple guests onto a show. It's about an hour-long program, and I would book guests to come on the show during the breaks between segments, so there was always commercial breaks. And sometimes those guests would call in, sometimes they wouldn't, so you had to be a little bit flexible in your ability to ad lib if you need to. So I learned very quickly under pressure. There's nothing like learning how to do audio production when you're doing it live on a radio station. So
you said yes and then figured it out along the way.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't, if you go to webtalkradio.com today and you go to the archives there, you can scroll back to 1999 and my list of archived episodes, and you can hear those early episodes that I did in the radio station, because actually I took them home on a cassette tape and played them into my computer to make an MP3 file. And this was back in 1999. And so that's how I started to distribute my show. It was before podcasting.
Wow.
And just offered a link off of my website, and I actually write articles, or I would make like a blog post or something like that. I was actually built my website from scratch. I didn't use a WordPress thing or anything like that. And actually, when I started podcasting, I didn't use any kind of publishing platform or anything like that. It was all hand-coded XML. So you had to there weren't the Lipsons or the Spreakers out there back in those days. So you had to do everything from scratch. And a lot of it was really, it hadn't been done before. So it was one of those things where you kind of learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you have a path to follow, or were you one of the ones that were paving the way?
There was no path to follow with the search engine stuff either. So you were learning, and there was no place you could go to learn this stuff. You just had to dive in and try and do it. And it's what a lot of people go through when they start up a new business, or they do anything that's new to them, is that you oftentimes don't have a lot of help out there, especially if it's something that's new to everybody. And that's exactly what was happening back then with the internet and the web, and especially online media. YouTube wasn't around. I mean, a lot of these content that was being produced back then was being distributed in very rudimentary and crude ways. And it was starting to reach an audience. I mean, I picked up well over 1 million listeners every month to my show based on what I could track at the time. It certainly isn't as accurate as the metrics and tracking that we see today with podcasting, even though podcasting continues to get a little bit of a black eye because it's not as good a metrics as what everybody expects. Well, it's come a long ways, to be really honest with you. I mean, and the expectations, and not to go down this little soapbox here a little bit, but the expectations around metrics around podcasting and on-demand media are far exceeding the reality and the expectations that are placed on radio. So it's really kind of ironic sometimes is that as we moved into this digital generation and this digital content creation, the expectations around analytics and knowing what people are doing and things like that. And that's a little bit of a blowback right now because of what we're seeing happen with Facebook and the Cambridge, analytics stuff, that people are sensitive to data gathering. And so you have this kind of this push and pull that's happening in the industry. I didn't want to take this conversation down that path necessarily too far, but it's just really ironic at times when I think about how far we've come. And now we're seeing kind of a blowback of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's interesting when we think about how easy things are sometimes, but then sometimes a little too easy and people get nervous about that. But yeah. I'm really curious about the paving the way, because knowing what it's like to be kind of a pioneer in an industry where there isn't a path to follow, it's kind of the blind leading the blind. And then all of a sudden you look up and you go, oh my gosh, it's working. Yeah. What hurdles or maybe any personal breakthroughs or aha moments did you have during these years?
Well, I think it was really nothing groundbreaking at any particular point in time. I mean, there was a lot of ups and downs and a lot of roller coaster rides. Working for a big company like Microsoft in this medium during its early days was a pretty rough area to work in from the standpoint of companies that are very profit motivated and scale motivated to keep the attention focused on an area that was my focus. I mean, at a big company like Microsoft, I was working on the Xbox team, and they were very much focused on gaming and those kind of things. And to keep a company like that focused on podcasting when podcasting is just kind of like a blip on the radar is definitely a challenge. And I worked really hard to keep the attention focused on podcasting as much as I could, and then eventually it kind of caught up with me a little bit, and then I had to, because the company really de-emphasized it and wound up shutting most of it down. So after about 6 years of going after it, and so it was definitely it's a challenge to work on a new medium like this, and to see it kind of, the perception of it really fluctuates so much. I mean, a lot of people will look at podcasting and they'll see that it's had its lows and it's had its highs, and now we're at the high of it and everybody's excited and it's the bomb now, or it's the hot thing now. The truth of the matter is, if you look in the data will tell you that since podcasting started in 2004, it's just been steadily growing every year at almost a very consistent clip. It's like between 2% and 4% every year. It hasn't had this big up and down swing that a lot of people see as what's happened in the medium, because really what the swing has been is in the press coverage or the hype or the media, focus on this medium. And what caused that perception dip back in, let's say, the mid 2000s timeframe was at the birth of social media, YouTube and Twitter, and those companies started to blow up and get all the media attention and get all the hype. So it was social media before podcasting was getting all the attention. Yeah, actually, Twitter started out as a podcasting company. I don't know if very many people know that, but the same guys that created Twitter created a company called Odeo back in the early days of podcasting, which was basically like an aggregator of podcast content online. And when Apple launched in 2005, they basically there's too much competition there, and those founders basically wound up shutting down Odeo because Apple was taking away all their traffic. And they wound up taking some of that technology and the developers and coming up with the concept of Twitter. And so then they shifted all their resources and they tried to sell all the assets for audio. I was working for a company at the time that was looking at buying all the assets for audio at that time. And I think they wanted like $1 million for it or something like that. So it was really kind of an interesting connection that podcasting has had to social media over the years.
It reminds me of the 10-year overnight success. Podcasting started in 2004, and it's 2018 now, and it's at the seemingly height of media attention when really it's been like growing slowly but steady
steady every year. Yeah, and it's like sure, we're growing a little faster now. I think we went from like 2 years ago, I think we were growing like at 2%, I think is what we had. And then the last 2 years, it's been growing at 4%. So if you look at it from that perspective, we've doubled our growth rate, right?
Yeah.
But it's still only 4%. So
that's awesome.
We have to keep things in perspective here, but it's a good trend line. And I think that people are starting to get excited about the medium, and there's a lot of creativity being applied to it. But the real phenomenal thing that I'm seeing happen in the medium is the diversity of the medium, because it hasn't always been this way. A lot more women involved in the medium, a lot more kind of racial diversity that's come into the medium over the last 3 to 4 years has really transformed this medium into something that's really starting to have a cultural impact. And that's the big thing that I'm seeing, and I hope that more people will focus on that.
Yeah, I know when it's probably easier to start on your own now than it was years ago with all of the resources and internet, because I know a lot of times you take a look and you think, oh, I need a studio and I need X, Y, and Z. I need rubber walls. I need, I need like sound insulation needs to be professionally done. Yeah. But people are doing it from their phone these days.
Yeah, you can, and you've hit the nail on the head. It's really much simpler now to do it. I mean, and that was a lot of the reasons why back in the early days of the medium, it was basically a geeky male-driven medium, and that's what really kind of held it back in the early days. It was guys like me. I mean, I'm a classic example. I was a technologist. I did a show on the internet and the web, so I was talking about tech stuff, and that's only going to take you so far as a medium. I mean, sure, you're going to get it off the ground, and the geeks and the guys with the long beards and stuff like that are doing Linux code or whatever. They can have a place for a period of time. But eventually, as the medium grows up, just like what happened with radio and TV, and it becomes easier and it gets more adoption and more listenership, and it appeals to broader demographic groups. And that's what's happened with podcasting over the last 14 years, is that it's grown up, and it's become something that's relevant to most people in the US, and it's becoming more and more so every year. So
yeah, I mean, really, people don't watch TV anymore, and they're not even listening to the radio. They're listening to podcasts because there's so much value basically for free that when you have this as a part of your daily routine, like, you get better. And I love how easy it is to really just impact people all over the world. So I've got one more question about this before we move on, but what kept you motivated in the early days? Because you didn't know podcasting was going to blow up and be awesome. I mean, we'd like to have vision and see things 3 steps ahead. But yet, where you are working, their focus was on gaming and videos and things. So how did you see the vision? Like, tell me a little bit about your passion for podcasting and why you kept going.
Well, that's actually a really terrific question, because I mean, it really cuts to the heart of, and I oftentimes don't think about it in that particular context, because on a day-to-day basis, you're just, I mean, a lot of those opportunities that I had were full-time jobs. So I was working a career. So of course I wanted to see my career succeed. And of course I wanted to see the medium succeed, because those things rode together for me. So I had opportunities when I was working at Xbox to, let's say, take on the international music side of the company, because back then Xbox had Xbox Music and Zune Music was, I was part of the Zune Music team, and so I was the only guy that's on the Zune Music team that wasn't doing music, if that tells you anything. So there were opportunities like that thrown my way on a regular basis, you work for a big company like Microsoft, and I believe this is the case with any of the bigger companies, whether it be Facebook or Google or Apple or any of those. They tend to want Swiss Army knives for employees, which is basically if they have a need in a certain area in their company, you need to be diverse enough to kind of like move between groups or projects or whatever. And that was one thing that I pushed back on when I was at Microsoft, is that they oftentimes, because they had the next, shiny thing that they were working on for the next development cycle, that they wanted to pull me over and work on that or whatever. And I just kept saying, no, I want to keep working on podcasts because that's where I came from. That's why I came into the company. That's what my skill set was. That's where my relationships were in the industry. And I just wanted to keep building on that. I didn't want to, make myself into something that was kind of like a mishmash of I don't even know how to say it, but not focused enough in my own career to build something long term, right? It was something that they wanted to just assign me to something different, right? That satisfied their needs but didn't satisfy my needs.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot at these big companies. So I at various times had to push back and say, I would occasionally take on another project. Like I launched the TV store for Zune back in those days, and that wound up getting folded into Xbox. And so I had to work with a lot of the big studios down in Hollywood to bring on content from ABC and NBC and Comedy Central and a lot of those big networks back in the early days of the on-demand TV business, right? And so I got involved in that for a while, but at the same time, I was still doing the podcasting stuff. And then eventually they wound up hiring a guy that would just, out of LA, that was just focused on the TV and movie business. So guess what? I went back to podcasting again. So it was one of those things that as long as I stayed focused on what my focus was and my experience and my network, that's where I had the most value.
Yeah.
And so as I built that over the years, of building a reputation of being an evangelist and being someone that is supporting of others in that particular market area, then that was something that was going to build value for me in the long run. And this past year, I got inducted into the Academy of Podcasters Hall of Fame. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I had been consistent in my efforts to drive this medium forward within the community and being a resource to the community and helping others. And I think that was the big thing that really put me in a position to get an award like that, is to, not always just think of myself, but that was part of my motivation, right? But my other part was to drive this medium forward and to build long-term relationships.
Ooh, I love that. I'm getting excited hearing your story because I hear a few things. Number one, it's honestly a bit better to be focused in one thing than it is to be a Swiss Army knife.
Yes, it is. I think it is these days, because especially if it's in an area that is kind of unusual, right? It's not like, let's say you're a project manager. I mean, a great example is if you're just a project manager, you can do any job. But are you really going to be really good at any one of those jobs? And that's where your vulnerability comes into. If you're really good in a particular area, so let's say you're really, really good at being a project manager in the aerospace business, or you like to build planes or something like that. I think if you focus on that, you become an expert at that. And that's what drives value to your next job. But I do think that there was some risk for me, because I think in the early days, it wasn't 100% clear that podcasting was going to withstand the onslaught of social media, right? And radio is still such a dominant player in the audio consumption space. I mean, even today, 90% of the audio that's listened to in the country, in the U.S. today, is still on broadcast radio. Podcasting is really, a lot of the metrics have shown that it's adding to people's listening time. It's not necessarily pulling a lot away from radio yet, though I think that's happening slowly at a slow clip, and radio will eventually, I think, really feel a significant hit from the on-demand part of this with podcasting. because people like to consume content on their schedules now. And I think it's a generational shift that's happening. And it's only been 14 years, right? That's not really a complete generation. So I think we've got probably another 10 years to go before we really have a significant impact on radio.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. I think on demand, I think convenience and no commercials. Like
fewer commercials, right? Yes.
My children won't even know what commercials are in a few years. Yes. But you focused on your strength and you focused in one direction long enough for you to become an expert. And I think that's really important because I think so many times we're either multitasking or multi-skilled and we really don't end up becoming good at anything or great at anything. Yeah. Maybe we're good at a few things, but I love that you stayed focused, which meant you had to say no sometimes, which meant that you had to be intentional about continuing to grow your skill set and add value. And it was something you didn't even know before. You learned it along the way by continuing to say yes in one consistent direction. Mm-hmm. Now, years later, you got an award. Congratulations. That's really exciting. And you are the expert. You're the go-to person in the podcasting space. And I know you've learned a ton. So I want to pick your brain a little bit on how to best communicate a story to an audience, maybe some things you've learned about how to share well or connect or collaborate over audio, since it's so it's just different than in person or even social media.
Yeah, I think that the big thing you have to think about is that you are speaking to one person, and that is the big thing that you always have to keep in mind. Now, how that translated into what you do as a host of a show is I think where the rubber hits the road. I think you have to speak to an individual, and that's oftentimes, and this is kind of like the shows that I do, or at least one of the shows that I do every week called the New Media Show. There's no show prep for this show. I have a co-host and myself get together over webcams and microphones. We just pull up the microphones every Saturday morning and we just start talking about the podcasting industry. What happened in the last week. It's very kind of impromptu. It's very unstructured, very much from the top of my head of what's happening. Same with the person on the other side too, Todd, my co-host. And that's what's interesting about podcasting for me, is that it's genuine, it's real. It's like you're a fly on the wall listening. And not every podcast out there is like that, and it doesn't have to be like that. I know a lot of storytelling podcasts are being done now, reality and fictional storytelling, which are terrific. And I know I've spent the last few weeks, I was like at the National Association of Broadcasters Conference, moderating some panel sessions down there about podcasting, and the big focus as you look at kind of the broadcast side of support for podcasting is they're trying to do like this 2020 kind of stuff, right? Where they're storytelling, or they're going into depth of sound experiences around podcasting. And so it's kind of going back to the early days of radio and what built the popularity of radio. It's like the theater of the mind, those type of radio dramas, those type of productions seem to be becoming popular. But the reality is podcasting's foundation and its roots are in personal interactive conversations. And that's the foundation of this medium. That's where it was birthed. That's where the growth has happened. Comedy is important, sports is important. All these genres are important, but the fundamentals are always there, usually. Now, I think the storytelling stuff is a little bit of a diversion from the foundations of podcasting. But the foundations of podcasting are like what you and I are doing here, Denise. They're conversations, they're sharing of information. And it's very fundamental to what built the internet, too, what built the World Wide Web, is people sharing information and learning from others. I know that was a big foundation of what got me involved in building websites and doing search engine marketing, was the ability to learn from others. And podcasting allows that to happen, either learning about how to podcast or learning about something else that the podcasting medium presents a pathway for people to learn how to maybe be better at playing football, or be better at playing tennis, or to fix something in their backyard, or to, now YouTube has served some of these purposes as well. But these are communities. Podcasts create basically affinity groups of common interests. And that's the big thing about podcasting that I think anybody that gets into the medium needs to understand, is that you're speaking to one person, and make it as personal as possible, make it authentic, make it real, use your life experiences and share those passions that you have. And that is and people will listen to that. If you're genuine and then you know what you're talking about, and it's in an area that other people have an interest in, you will find an audience with your podcast. And that's just, it's proven time and time again that that's what works.
That's awesome. Yeah, I hear a few things. I hear be yourself, be raw, be vulnerable, share your stories. But I also hear you saying like when you're passionate about something, you can kind of deem yourself an expert and teach people.
Yeah.
Teach people things, but yet you're doing it in a way that's super relatable.
Well, and learn from others. Realize that you're never done learning. I mean, you're an expert, but there's always somebody out there that's going to know a little bit more, right? Or has some other little piece of information that you're missing, and you always need to be searching for that to be able to connect those pieces together. It depends on how one learns too. I know many people learn from reading books or going to school or whatever. Those are all important as well. But I think that the human interaction, just like what you're doing here, Denise, you're learning from your guests. And then as you're doing it, you're also learning about how to do it yourself. So you're basically affirming your own experiences in your learning process based on speaking to others as well as your own experience in this process. And that is a powerful combination to accelerate your skill level in whatever topic area that you're covering, in conjunction with also your ability to communicate and your ability to present to others. When I started doing this, I'll be real frank with you, I had some speech problems. I had a hard time getting up in front of groups of people before I started doing podcasting and radio. I didn't like to speak in front of other people. I didn't like to speak really much at all to anybody, actually, back in my earlier days of my life. And so it basically brought me out of my shell. It built my confidence, and really kind of, I learned to relax. And I think that's one of the other things that you need to do, is that just like when you're sitting at like Starbucks, talking to a friend, or you're out to get lunch with a friend of yours or something, you guys speak in a way that's very comfortable and very familiar. That's what you have to bring to podcasting too. And that's the key to building, because if you think about it, those listeners have their earbuds in their ear, their inner ear oftentimes, and it doesn't get any more personal than that.
Yeah. You're raw, you're emotional, you're teaching, but when you're passionate, it really allows for the listener to connect with you. Mm-hmm. Have you learned of some tips or tricks to tell a good story well?
You do need to think about the journey that a listener goes through when they listen to a story. I think very fundamental to storytelling is, having a beginning, a middle, and an end. I mean, you have to set it up, and then you have to deliver some context, and you have to, bring them to a conclusion. And I think those are all things that are part of really every podcast. I think every podcast has either long stories or they have short stories, and I think that's part of the information sharing process. I mean, if you think about going back in the concept of folklore, or how people shared information over the centuries of how people communicated within communities. Oftentimes there were no historical records. It was all basically folklore, and people telling stories about people's experiences with other people and experiences in their life journeys. And that's fundamental to what podcasting has built. Podcasting is basically what I call folklore. And that is what is important to storytelling. And if you really want to, I think, learn how to be a terrific podcaster, maybe go back and study some records or some things on folklore and learn about that process too. And I think you can really, I think, help you understand and get context to how you need to communicate in a podcast that fits into how humans communicate with each other.
Ooh, I love that, because you are taking people on a journey. And I love when, you say beginning, middle, and end. You want the listener to picture themselves in that beginning, middle, and end, and kind of be on that journey with you, meaning their emotions go up and down along with the story. Yes. And that's what people remember. They don't necessarily remember the facts. They remember how they felt.
Exactly.
And you can do so much of that through storytelling, through audio. I love it.
Yeah. And people will remember you, whether it be good or bad, based on how they feel, not on the data that they got from you or the information that they got from you, that they will remember you. I mean, it's just like, I learned this very early with my radio show, is that when I would have guests on my show that were controversial, sometimes I would get a lot of hate mail. I would get a lot of people, with good examples. I had some guests on over the years from an organization called PETA. That's the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals. And oftentimes they were viewed as almost like a terrorist group almost, because they would go out there, they would be so aggressive for animal rights and being, not cruel to animals, that they would basically almost like terrorism type tactics, or they would put up videos that were kind of offensive really to people that were embracing of cruelty to animals. And that really rubbed people the wrong way. But what it taught me is that audience engagement can go two ends of the spectrum. It can be positive engagement or it can be negative engagement. But at the end of the day, what you want is engagement. And so sometimes you have to sit back and get a little bit of a tough skin and say, well, if this person is coming in and bashing me about what my topic of my show is, but they keep coming back bashing me every week, that means that they're still listening. So it isn't like we've offended them to the point where they've left the show. They're engaged because they have a different way of looking at the world, and they're engaging with this in a way that's inspiring them to have an emotional reaction, and that's what they want. So sometimes you have to deliver what people want, and sometimes it's a little contrary to what you think you should be doing. But there are two viewpoints, especially these days, right? We have a very divided country, and sometimes being controversial on both sides can inspire people to differently too.
That's so funny. If they're emotional enough to leave a negative comment, they want to know what's next, and so they're still going to come
So they're still tuning in. So I just say, it's great, and it's like I understand your point, but I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. So
yeah. Well, and it sounds like too, whatever you're passionate about. So if you're listening and you have a story to share and you've gone through a hard struggle or you've gotten to the other side or whatever it is that you're passionate about, it sounds like you really can communicate that passion emotionally, and people will want to be on that journey with you, and they'll hear it. And so your passion could be iguanas. Your passion could be, cooking. It doesn't matter what it is, exactly. But because you're passionate about it and you tell it with emotion, people will listen. Yeah.
And if you can make yourself vulnerable and tell stories that have emotion behind them, I think it also, and it's always best when it's genuine. Now, I know some people are good at acting, right? So you have kind of two things going on there. It just depends on one's viewpoint. I mean, authenticity is important, but at the end of the day, your goal is to drive emotion. So sometimes maybe it's okay to be a little over emphatic about things, even though maybe you don't feel at that deep level of emotion. And this is a touchy area, and this could, this is part of what I'm talking about being a little bit kind of pushing the envelope a little bit, is that people can be authentic, but they can also be authentic in a more significant way. And it may not be entirely 100% genuine, but it maybe still comes from the same place. To drive that kind of reaction in people, I guess it's up to you to decide whether or not the kind of emotional reaction that you want is a positive one or a negative one, and that gets back to your own personal values.
I love podcasting as a way of sharing my passion with the world, and I love what you said about community as well, because for our listeners, I mean, we're all wanting to grow and get better. And so I do feel like there's a community of people who listen and want to implement and grow their business and grow their lives and go through their transitions. But another thing I want to mention is collaboration, because I have absolutely loved and been so blessed to have so many amazing guests on the show, including yourself, that have helped me to raise my lid, to up-level my network. Tell me a little bit about how you've been able to use podcasting, or how you even train to use podcasting to collaborate and grow your audience by working with others.
I think that the big thing is just being available to others, to be a resource to them, to help them succeed. And I think you don't always get a direct benefit from that right away, but you never know. Things come around over time, and collaborating with others to help them when they need something, and then they will be more inclined to help you when you need something. I think to some degree, guilt is a pretty powerful motivator at times as well. I'll be honest about it. Doing things for others, not necessarily expecting something from it, I think is also something that's important. If it comes, it's good. If it doesn't, then you gave it a good try, and maybe you've built an alliance there in the long run. That who knows? But you can't really count on something, and you can't really get upset at someone if there isn't a reciprocation there. So I think collaboration is something that you do for yourself more than others, and I think if you keep that mindset in place, then I think you're more likely to I think remain positive and remain focused on continuing to do those activities.
It reminds me too of just focusing on adding value. And when you're adding value with other podcasters or other people who are also looking to grow themselves and grow their business, and your focus is really just on adding value and not on the outcome, then usually things move forward and the outcome is positive, whether it's a year or 2 years or 6 months down the road. But when you're focusing on adding value and, like you said, being available and a resource, I really do think that it's a great way to connect and meet new people in different genres, but who still have such amazing stories and such wisdom.
Yeah.
So what are you doing now? You are a host of several shows, and you travel and teach on this subject. What are you doing now these days?
I'm doing all those things. I've got 2 podcasts that I do every week. Both of them are live shows. So I've kind of gone back to the world of live, which is where I started in all this. Because I did it live for a while, and I got frustrated because of those callers that weren't calling in, like I was talking about earlier. And I started to pre-produce everything. And so now I'm back to doing everything live, and live video, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and then I do a live audio show on Spreaker. So, because that's one of the capabilities that Spreaker has, is it combines being able to do a live show with a podcast. So those two worlds collide, linear versus the on-demand part. So that's what I'm doing today, and it's really just part of what I do. I mean, I'm still working with a lot of content creators, helping them get their shows promoted and out there, and helping them with ideas on show concepts. And then also just traveling. Really, I'm starting to travel the world now. I'm putting on a podcasting workshop in Portugal, in Lisbon, at the end of next month.
Wow.
So I'm going to be over there. This week I'm up in Canada at Pod Summit. I'm a keynote speaker up there for that event for kind of central Canada. So I'm on the road and doing podcasting too. So it's continuing. These are really the kind of activities that I've been doing for the last 14 years. So it's just now it's starting to turn into an international thing, and Spreaker is fundamentally an international company. So we have very strong presence in like Spain and in Europe. So I'm trying to build those relationships at a deeper level in those areas. I know a lot of those countries are about 3 to 4 years behind the U.S. in podcasting adoption, because a lot of the international countries have a little different media culture than they do here in the U.S., which has basically put them in a little slower kind of adoption curve. But it seems to be picking up right now, and a lot more people are listening to podcasts. You get players like Spotify getting involved in the medium. We're starting to see a lot of younger people consuming podcasts in Spotify, and in the countries that we're starting to reach with Spotify is starting to get pretty diverse. So the medium is changing and it's going global, and that's the thing. I mean, it always has been global. It's just that it feels like it's accelerating now. I think in the next 3 years, we're going to see podcasting be pretty close to what it is in the U.S. In many countries around the world.
Where do you see podcasting in the U.S. in the next 3 to 5 years?
I think it's just going to steadily continue to grow in audience and grow in content. Many in the podcasting space are a little concerned that the content side is growing faster than the audience side. Though you could make a case that content drives audience, so maybe it's not as an issue that we need to be concerned about. But I think new technology is going to have an impact on the medium. As you think about autonomous cars, AI, the artificial intelligence stuff around how people discover content. It seems like podcast search is starting to get some focus from the VC community these days, and the combination of AI technology and audio search appears to be picking up steam again. I've been a long-term kind of skeptic of audio search as an effective way to drive discovery of podcast content. But I think if you combine it with AI technology, maybe there's something there. So, and then you think about what's happening with these smart speaker platforms that are out there too, the Google Home and the Echo type devices from Amazon. You can see kind of a growing potential new kind of listening paradigm. A lot of those platforms are not significant in the podcasting space quite yet, because I still believe that they're pretty rudimentary and not very advanced yet. But the whole spoken word side, natural language kind of communications with computing devices is a kind of a long-term trend. And that methodology of discovering audio content, it's an audio medium itself, will translate, I think, eventually. And it's going to be ubiquitous, just like we have with our online connections. I think these smart agent technologies will permeate our lives. We may not like it from a privacy perspective, but I think it's coming, and it's going to have an impact on podcasting.
It is interesting to think about. And I think so many of us are living day to day, but when you really think, okay, where are things going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? And will my 7-year-old ever learn to drive? Or will we all have self-driving cars in 5 to 10 years? And if that's the case, does it need to look like a car? And we can get a lot of work done while we're driving, and we can truly
watch YouTube videos.
Exactly. There's a lot of things that will change in our world, which will then change the way we consume information, the way that we, read, we're entertained differently. And so podcasting, in a sense, has to kind of think 3 steps ahead as well, so it can be a part of the trend.
Well, it hasn't always done that, though. That's the thing. It's always been kind of like at the tail end, right? It's always been kind of something that has been added to technology late. But it feels like that the direction of natural language user interfaces with computing devices will put audio or spoken word audio at the forefront. And I think that's what we're starting to see happen now. And that's what's really, I think, fundamentally changing. But I agree with you. I think that the autonomous car thing and artificial intelligence are the 2 biggest, I think, fundamental shifts that are going to happen that will be I believe comparable to what we went through with the development of the internet and the web.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be that transitioning and that much of an impact on all of our lives.
Wow. Imagine we were able to experience two huge shifts in our lifetime. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little scary too.
It is a little scary, but hey, this doesn't happen very often. So it's kind of cool to be a part of that.
That's right.
I was in 7th grade when internet came out, and I remember the dial-up, where you are, you start it and then you run away, and 30 minutes later,
you finally connected,
connects.
right?
Yeah.
And it trickles connections to you, and you wait 5 minutes for the web page to load. Right?
Yep. Yeah. But I know, even podcasting now, it's not even for just business people. I know stay-at-home moms who have it over Bluetooth in their vans, driving their kids to work, and their kids are being are inducted into the life of podcasting at an early age because their parents just have it on all the time. Yep. And if our Alexa says, "Hey, Alexa, please play Dreamcast with Denise Walsh," and she plays it, like, this is going to just be that much easier for people to connect with their favorite podcasters.
Yep.
That's very cool.
It is.
So who do you learn from? What are your favorite books, and who are your mentors?
I have to be real honest with you, Denise. I don't really read books much anymore. I guess I went to college and I have a college degree, and I read lots of books when I was in college, but I'm kind of living real time now. So it's one of those things that I think about a lot. It's not that I don't consume information and learn. I'm constantly learning. I just don't read any books. I know lots of people actually listen to audiobooks and things like that, but I don't even do that. So I don't have any books to recommend other than just find a terrific podcast that's out there that I'm a kind of a political junkie too. I like to consume all sorts of things around what's happening in the politics world, and I'm a technologist too, so I consume a lot of content around technology and trying to keep up with all those latest trends and obviously all the podcast shows that are out there. There's quite a few podcasts about podcasting, enough that I don't contribute to that mess of programming out there as well myself. So. Those are my areas of focus. So those are the areas that I tend to focus in on.
I love the idea of real time. Really, I think that I personally thrive when I learn and teach. And so if you're learning things that are applicable to what you're doing now, and then you can teach them to your audiences all around the world, that's the best way of learning, I feel like.
Yeah, because it seems like, I know certain books are good for big concepts, but it feels like sometimes the books are kind of like behind because it takes time to write them, publish them. By the time they get out, they're less relevant. But I'm not saying this to say that there aren't value in many books out there, because what a lot of those books are is life experience journeys that very successful people have shared. And I think I guess I'm just too busy in my life. I just don't have time to sit down for a couple of hours and read a book.
Do you have a few favorite podcasts to recommend?
Well, like I said, I'm very much a geek, and I listen to shows that oftentimes I listen to shows that I'm friends with the hosts, obviously, which could be a very long list, but it's ones that I have a personal connection with or I've been a guest on, which is kind of interesting. It's not like I'm a regular guest on them, but I have been a guest on some of them. But I just really like the people that do the shows, and one of them is one, because I spent many years at Microsoft, is called Windows Weekly, and it's a show that's done by Lou Laporte and a couple of tech journalists. So there's one there that I listen to on a regular basis to keep me up to date with what's happening with technology and things like that. And then I listened to another show called The Wolf Den. It's actually a podcast done by the Midroll Media folks that also own Stitcher, that they talk to leaders in the podcasting space. So as you can see, my portfolio of shows that I listen to is very, very focused. And I think as you look at your own career, I think that's not a bad way to look at it. There's shows out there that cover various areas of career that I think can help your career and stay up to date and hear from different people. And those are all important connections and knowledge bases that you can pick up to help your own career.
Very interesting. Awesome. Thank you for that. All right. I have one last question in closing. So anything else that you can share with a listener out there who is looking to grow themselves, looking to grow their business, looking to share their story and maybe share their passion with others in the world? What is one thing throughout your 15 years of podcasting experience working with people who are similar, wanting to share their passion with the world that you could share with a listener today?
Yeah, I think find some leaders in the area that you have an interest in and connect with them and start building those networks of people that have common interests with you. Don't be fearful of them as, well, they're your competitors. Look at them as resources of which that you can share information with and you can connect with. Maybe go try and meet up with them at a conference. Try and connect with your community of people that are like-minded to you and have them on as a guest, or just don't be fearful of connecting with people that maybe you view as your competitors. Because one of the things that one of the shows that I do, and this is a terrific example of it, is called The New Media Show, and it's at newmediashow.com. My co-host, Todd Cochran, is actually a competitor of mine. He's the CEO of Raw Voice Blueberry, and it's a podcast hosting platform that's very large, very influential in the medium. And I work for Spreaker and Voxnest, which we're diametrically competitive to each other. So, but we've been doing a show together on the medium of podcasting for like the last 7 years. So we just do it every Saturday, but don't be afraid to friend your, maybe what you view as your competitor or your enemy. Obviously you have to be careful probably what you share of your company's secrets, but just be open to working with others that are in your competitive sphere, because if you leverage your energies together, you can grow whatever area that you are in, right? And grow your own career. They can help you. You can help them in various areas. If you prove to them that you're a resource that can help them, they'll help you too. And there might be some synergies that you can reach that will cause both of your companies to grow in the industry that you're working at, go to another level. So I think people tend to think of competitors as people that they should avoid. And I would say just the opposite.
I love that. I have heard that competitiveness is outdated, and it's now the world of collaboration, where we can get together like-minded, like not just add value, but when you both do it, you're adding value to all of the audience, and you can create momentum in a big way.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much, you guys. If you are interested in learning a bit more about Rob and what he does, check out robgreenlee.com. All the information will be in the show notes, as well as his companies, Voxnest and Spreaker. All of that will be available for you in the show notes, as well as the information on his recent Guinness World Record. Can you end by telling us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Back in 1997, I was working for the Florida Department of Citrus. It's a governmental agency down in Florida. I was actually still living up in Seattle, but I built the world's largest glass of orange juice for them because I was a marketing promotions manager for the Northwest region for the Florida citrus industry. And so I built the world's largest glass of orange juice and set the Guinness Book of World Records up here in Seattle, of all places, for the Florida industry. So
you might as well. Yeah. Why not?
That's right. Right.
I love that. Creative marketing.
Yeah, I toured the country with this 10-foot tall glass, kept refrigerated at 34 degrees. It was all stainless steel, circulation pumps. It was all custom built, and basically used it as a sampling tool. It would go to like produce conferences and festivals and stuff around the country, and Tropicana and Minute Maid would ship in big pallets of orange juice, and I would fill up this glass. And and people would come by and sample orange juice all day long, right directly out of the glass. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very creative marketing.
Yes.
Spreaker live show, and then the new media show. All of the information for Rob and his shows and his businesses and all of the things that he's doing will be in the show notes today. So Rob, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. You've got 14, 15 years of kind of pioneering and being the first one, but then not just hoarding it for yourself, teaching everybody else around you how to level up themselves and get their passion out into the world. And so I know I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you and the pioneering that you did in the podcasting space. And so I want to say thank you, not only from me, but from all of us podcasters who are really able to add value into the world. We can do that because of someone like you who is really, truly just taking one step at a time and giving us a path to follow.
Well, thank you, Denise. You're an example of what the future of podcasting is, and I think that's amazing. And your leadership is greatly appreciated as well.
Awesome. Have a great day, you guys.
Thank you so much for listening today. Head over to denisewalsh.com. Enter your email to subscribe to our list, and I will be sending out an early bird special coupon. 50% off, in fact, of the Dream Life Workbook when it is launched in just a few months. So if you want to have first dibs, let's get your name on that list. Thanks again. I so appreciate you. And remember to dream big.